Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for coming for this debate. It's about the global food security. No farmers, no food. Thank you to all the farmers. I think that's important. We talk about all the farms. It doesn't matter big or small. Throughout the class this semester, we talk about the global food security. You can see the definition. It is supplying enough nutritious food for everybody. During the class, we talk about three sections, that is availability, access, and the utilization. So these students will talk about large farms and the small farms, how they're going to fit into the food security. We have two teams, Team Savannah and Team Chris. And actually, our moderator is going to introduce these students, and they're actually very, very good students. Seniors, most of them are. Our moderator, my good old friend, Dr. Bob Polomsky, he has many talents, not only a public speaker, and he has his own radio show, and he's a writer, he has his own book, and I'm so privileged that I also wrote a little bit on one of his books. So he's the one going to moderate this session, and at the end of the session, you will hear from one of the leading experts that moving us towards to the future. That's Dr. Steve Krasovich. He's here in the audience, and he will talk about how we're going to lead to the future. He's a professor in our department, and also he's the endowment chair for the Robert and Louise Crocker Trustees Chair of Genetics. And also he was the former Cornell's vice provost for the life sciences. So we are so glad that he's here. With that, I'm going to give the floor to Bob Polomsky.
Thank you so much. I've always wanted to be an anchor man, and so this is my opportunity to live my dream. But with regard to this particular topic, as I was asked to present, to be the moderator here, I thought back, way back in the 80s, early 80s when I went to school, we talked about global food security. And it almost seems like it's a topic that we talk a lot about, and I'm just wondering, are we making any inroads? Are we accomplishing anything? And so I'm really happy that you in the audience, and hopefully you, will be watching this videotape and you think about this, that this is a real crisis that we're facing. And I am just honored to be in the presence of these students who are addressing these really difficult issues, especially looking at addressing global food security from a small farmer or production standpoint versus a large agricultural enterprise. So what I would like to begin with at first is for you to get to know who these two teams are. So to my right is Savannah, and she is heading up the large-scale production team. Mm-hmm. So if you would please introduce yourself as well as your teammates.
All right, good morning. My name is Savannah Petrone. I am a junior plant and environmental science major. And then we have Corey Cruz, who is a senior mechanical engineering major. And then Jacob Notch, who is a senior agricultural mechanization and business major. And then we have Adam Kay, who is a senior plant and environmental science major. And then Tristan Lawrence, who is a senior agronomy plant and environmental science major.
All right, and now to my left are the small scale producers. Chris, could you introduce your team to us?
Hi, I'm Chris Miller. I'm a senior ag mech major here at Clemson, and I'm the head of the small scale production team. To my right, we have Rudd Orr, who's also a senior ag mech, and then to my left, we have Bennett Harrelson, Caitlin Murphy, and Hunter Siders, who are all senior PES majors.
Very good. And so what I would like for the audience is, first of all, let these teams present their cases, and then we'll open up the floor to any questions or comments that you have. And so with regard to the first question, since it's ladies first, we'll go to Savannah and her team. And I would like her to talk about what does food security mean to large-scale producers? And then the reverse of that question would be, what does food security mean to small-scale farmers?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and open the discussion with the opening statement for large scale, and then Corey's going to go ahead and take on that question. Mm-hmm. So in this debate, we're going to be talking about, or we're going to be supporting large-scale farmers and we're going to be focusing on the production in Asia. So currently, large-scale farming is defined as having a minimum of 5 acres, and this is in order to reach an optimal size for a business enterprise. And currently in Asia, large-scale production isn't as prevalent as small-scale farmers are, and this is due to large-scale farmers outcompeting the small-scale farmers. According to FAO.org, in the article, Characterization of Small Farmers in Asia and the Pacific, published in April 2010, stated that the average hectare per agricultural holding in Asia is about 1 hectare. So this is about 2.5 acres, which is significantly less than the minimum requirement for large-scale farming. So we can see that in Asia, small-scale farming is a lot more prevalent than large-scale farming. However, we are seeing an increase in large-scale farming in Asia due to them having the technology to outcompete smaller-scale farmers. So, for example, according to Derek Byerly and Klaus Steniger, who both worked and wrote for the World Bank, in the article The Rise of Large Farm Drivers and Development Outcomes, published in December 2010, said that large-scale palm oil production continues to increase in Southeast Asia. So this is having an average with about 10,000 hectares. And large-scale farmers in Asia have a really big production of tree crops, which is like palm oil, rubber, coconut, coffee, and teas. Also root crops such as yams and sweet potatoes and rice. So although currently small-scale farmers do have the upper hand, they're more prevalent in Asia, large-scale farming is on the rise and it continues to outcompete small farmers.
Interesting points. Go ahead, Chris.
All right, I'll go ahead and introduce the current state of small-scale agriculture in Asia. So the FAO reported that from 1995 to 2005, the average farm size in Asia was roughly 1 hectare, and this is well below the global average of 5.5 hectares. So what this means is that we have a lot of people in this area operating on very small amounts of land. And as a matter of fact, 57.9% of all of these farms are operated on less than 1 hectare, and that represents over 14% of the total operated land in Asia. Now, if we look at farms that are under 2 hectares, which is roughly 5 acres, this counts for all but 15% of land holdings in Asia, and it's 31% of total ag production. This is a vital portion of the ag industry in Asia because of a lot of global issues going forwards. This is a sector of agricultural production that is especially drought susceptible, which we're seeing more and more of, and as well as other natural phenomena such as El Nino, La Nina, having more and more of an impact on this segment of agriculture. A lot of this high natural impact is due to these farmers not being able to invest into the infrastructural security of their operations, such as irrigation and water control, rainfall, accumulation devices, things like that. Another aspect of the small-scale farmer in Asia is that most of these farmers have an integrated crop and livestock production system that are very often filling a role in a niche marketplace with specialized products. You have millet, sorghum, you have lentils, for example, as well as meat and poultry, that these farmers are the only people that are able to provide these products in the very, very rural areas in Asia. So from that aspect, it's of utmost importance that we continue to support these small-scale farmers as a means of ensuring rural food security.
Do you have any questions from your group? Because I've got a couple of questions that came into mind, but if you would like to challenge one another.
Go ahead and ask yours.
All right, and so, well, when I was listening to your comments, Savannah, with large-scale production, I got the impression it seems like your interest, your team's interest, is in creating an agribusiness environment or creating a U.S. agricultural system, which probably even favors vertical integration. And so I'm wondering, with all of these small landholders, what happens to them when the Acme Agricultural Company comes in and takes all of this land? What happens to them? And then also with regard to the agribusiness, I understand the importance of technology, but then we're also thinking about now trying to introduce perhaps GMOs if they're acceptable in Southeast Asia, and bringing all this technology to what I feel are subsistence farmers. There's not a question coming out of this, but these are just comments. The other thing I wonder about too is I see in South Carolina, we do have agribusiness that has moved into Aiken and in other counties, but I'm also seeing this movement of sustainable agriculture, the whole locavore movement of growing locally. So I'm kind of torn when I see farming that has occurred for centuries, and apparently it's not good enough, so we have to incorporate these modern agricultural techniques, and that is the idea. And so what are your thoughts about the impacts that it may have on this? Is it subsistence farming? They're supporting themselves, feeding their families, but also they are providing products to the marketplace, so they are generating income. There's something wrong with that system, and that what you're saying is we need to move into much of a larger system that probably has fewer agricultural workers, but perhaps it's even more efficient. But then efficiency also is another series of questions. So I just need your thoughts to give me some dialogue here as to supporting your system.
So what was the particular question?
Or the particular question is this the right approach for these small farmers who have small acreages? Is it more effective to feed Asia if we have these large mega farms, if you will,
Right.
that are owned by large corporations? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But I'm just wondering about the displacement and the impacts that they may have on the environment, on the populace, on the economy.
Right. Well, I think it's going to have to be definitely a mix, because we're not going to be able to just do one, large scale or small scale, but we're going to have a mix of both.
And so you're also addressing the governments in these various countries as well.
Right.
Will some of these governments allow an agribusiness corporation to move into their environment?
Yeah, it's definitely political. You have political issues with it as well.
Okay.
There's a
Mark,
lot to comes with
it looks like you'd like to add to that.
Me?
Yes, you.
You're good.
Because I know your interest is in agribusiness. So how can you help Asia with your large...
While doing my research for my topic that I'm going to talk about, I ran into that a lot of large farmers, they don't eat what they grow actually. They usually just export it, which brings in capital to the government and to them, and pretty much through taxes the government gets it, which then allows for programs to be put in to add better food products to the systems as well. But the large farmers just typically have a subplot on their land where they grow for friends and family.
Okay.
So, I mean, by doing so what I'm saying is large farmers are actually pretty much bringing in capital to them and to the country, which then the government uses to put in programs to give subsidies and everything else to be able to give food out provide the food.
Very good. Well, Savannah, I do apologize. I think next time I'll try to craft some questions instead of doing a brain dump on you like that. All right. So with the next question, the team on the left are the small-scale farmers, and I'm trying not to be biased. All right. So I'm trying to be very right down the middle, sitting on that fence. I'll try to do better with this one. So with regard to this next question that Dr. Dill Thavarajah had provided me, the question deals with the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, where it led to a lot of breeding work with regard to cereal crops. And the intent, of course, with Dr. Borlaug is to attempt to feed the world with genetics, with breeding. And so I would like to ask the team on the left with regard to small-scale farming, what was the impact that the Green Revolution had on small-scale farming?
Well,
And your name, sir, please.
Bennett Harrelson.
Okay, Bennett.
So the ultimate success of the Green Revolution was actually dependent on smallholder farmers. It was in these undernourished regions and underdeveloped countries, the ability to increase crop yields through breeding for non-lodging plants, kind of that middle ground of the tall plants versus small plants that wouldn't allow them to fall over. This increase in crop yield due to mid-sized wheat and rice varieties was able to increase food supply in these regions. But the problem that we're running into now is it increased food supply, but this just led to the problem that we're now facing, where these people are undernourished due to lack of micronutrients such as vitamin A, iron, zinc deficiencies that we see with blindness, anemia, and all these other problems from eating these wheats and rices that are high in starches that don't have the micronutrients that other crops do, such as lentils and other things that have more protein and that are needed more for the diet. And so as we move forward, I think we've kind of gone full circle, where we've gotten through this area where we've created this food surplus to some degree from the 60s and 70s, but food that wasn't nutritious and not the proper food that we needed. And now we've kind of gone to where we need the greener revolution, where we need to incorporate food products that are rich in micronutrients, which they need to put in staple crops, which is rice is a huge staple crop in Asia. And so through the increased use of biofortified crops, crops that have been used through just overhead fertilizer for increased nutrients, as well as breeding and genetic techniques, we can increase the micronutrient deficiency problems that we're seeing in these underdeveloped regions of Asia.
And so again, to just refresh my memory, so how does the small producer play into this?
Well, in these regions, smallholder farms account for 80% of the food that's created in these regions.
Small producers.
Smallholder farms create 80% of the
huge.
food. So it's very big, and it's, as you said earlier, this is a cultural and traditional practice of agriculture, not one that you can kind of just switch into a large-scale production, if that makes any sense. And to do this through biofortified crops, we're going to need help from the government, because obviously this is an area that's very impoverished. There's not a lot of income. They're not really going to be able to afford all this technology. There's going to have to be some kind of subsidies and stuff like that from the government to help this new greener movement get going.
And Savannah, just hang on a sec. So with these biofortified crops, how are these seeds going to be given to the farmers? And with regard to these seeds as well, are they open pollinated, or will they have to be purchased annually by these low-income farmers?
Well, with biofortified crops, there's really three ways that you can reach biofortification in a crop, and one of them is just fertilizer application. With micronutrients, especially with zinc, you can fertilize with zinc, which would increase zinc content in specific plants. Or you can actually do breeding, which is going to be tough for these people to be in charge of the breeding, or they can do genetic techniques such as GMOs and stuff like that. And with the stuff such as breeding and the genetic stuff, that's going to have to be helped with the government. There's going to have to be subsidies to provide programs for research in these areas for crops to be produced. And then once these crops are produced, it's going to have to be given to these smallholder farms so that they can be taught, how to grow these crops properly.
Very good. Okay, now how about from your perspective, what was the impact that the Green Revolution had from the large-scale producer's perspective?
Yeah, so...
Your name, please?
My name is Corey Cruz. Yeah,
Very
thank
good,
you.
Corey.
So, like Bennett said, moving into the greener revolution, I think that large-scale production is going to be the key in solving these issues instead of just relying on the smallholders. So, like you said, one of the main reasons for food insecurity is the poverty rate. So, people don't have the funds to buy enough food, and when they do, they're buying like the cheaper, less nutritious crops such as rice and wheat. This cuts fruit, vegetables, and proteins out of their diet, not completely, but it does keep them undernourished. These large-scale farms are typically ran more efficiently with better technology and mechanization. Recent innovations in crop breeding, tillage, and information technology has made labor supervision easier and reduced the diseconomies of large-scale operations. The use of GPS-guided machinery and information sensors in the fields allow a manager to effectively supervise up to 15 hectares. These newer processes require less physical labor, and with less labor costs and this higher production rate of crops, the market can bring in more produce and drop the prices for the consumers in the market. And then with the large-scale producers taking control of the market, they can grow more nutritious food instead of just relying on growing cash crops, like Adam said, for exports, such as like rice, oil, and wheat, to bring in a profit so they can concentrate more on nutritious stuff. And finally, the large-scale farms have more funding and investment opportunities, which allow them to easily transition and adopt sustainability concepts that the smallholder farmers might not be able to afford.
So I'm going to summarize essentially what I'm understanding from you is technology is the answer. Technology will simplify the lives of these farmers,
Right.
and increase productivity. But the issue that I have, and I can't, that 80% number, repeat that again, Bennett?
So in Asia, 80% of the food production is through smallholder farms. So only 20%, or roughly 20%, is through large, I guess, scale production. But that's not even known if all that production is in Asia. Maybe some of that stuff is imported in through markets, the food that's being bought.
So Corey, so you have this big pie, 80% of that is contributed by these guys.
Right.
And you want to take a piece of the pie? Is that what you're essentially telling me, that you want to take some of that 80% and maybe you want to be on the 80% side of production?
Right. Yeah. So.
And what happens to these people? I guess similar to the United States, we have fewer farm workers and we put them into maybe technology jobs. But also when you talk about this GPS technology, how are you going to transition that? Or are you going to introduce workers from other countries who know GPS
Right.
technology, who do this precision agriculture? That's your intent, to bring these people into these countries.
Yeah, so with typically with these larger companies that are in the agribusiness, they do have like highly skilled managers and stuff that can do this GPS technology, and I mean, it does take education for these people over there, but like I said, the larger corporations have the funds and they can hire these highly skilled workers versus just relying on these smallholders with.
Corey, think,
Yeah.
somebody give a rebuttal to this. All right, I feel like I'm leaning more toward this side, and I can't do that. But please, I mean, my gosh, he's giving you all this fresh red meat. Go for it.
Well, I think what Corey said, I mean, he does have a point where these large-scale producers do have a lot more money. They definitely do have the funds, but this is a cultural and traditional practice of farming. And I don't think you can just like take away these people's livelihoods of what they've done for centuries, from passed down through their family. And I think that we can use techniques that are used in large-scale farming. They just have to be implemented into small scale. They need to be educated. There needs to be the increase of production techniques that we use today over here need to be implemented into there. And Chris, I think you have a couple words.
Yeah, I was going to add on to what Bennett was saying to address what Corey was saying about the decrease in farm labor. All of a sudden, you're going to need these people's land, and agriculture is the only industry in rural parts of Asia. What are these people going to do for work? There's not another industry around.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you folks, I mean, this is a great academic discussion, but periodically we need to think, what is the reality? And could you envision yourself being in Southeast Asia? Just
like any other developing country, I mean, the United States was once mainly agriculture until like the Industrial Revolution. So like we did here, we kind of transitioned away from all the different farming and did move into technology jobs and maybe some production. Not cutting out all smallholder farming, but maybe adding in some more large-scale corporations to do all this farming on one big plot that is ran more efficiently with the newer technology and higher skilled workers.
Very good. So we need to move along here. I'm looking at my technological device here, Corey. and we need to be on time. So with our next topic, we're going to talk about production. And so back to the large-scale producers, what are the goals with regard to production from the standpoint of the large-scale farmer?
Well, I'm Jacob Cox once again.
Very good.
But the primary goal of large-scale producers in this region, which really is the primary goal of agricultural producers globally, is to provide that ample supply of food resources, not just food resources, fiber as well. These crops that are needed for sustaining a healthy lifestyle and for building a healthy lifestyle in these regions, especially where malnourishment is prevalent. So large-scale producers, they are more apt to using newer modern techniques, like Corey said, and to build upon what he'll say, I'll probably elaborate on that some. So these modern systems that we see in North America, yeah, it's massive. It's a mega farm, and we do have that issue of what happens to the. We do have that issue of displacement of smallholder farmers, but we also got to think about the rate of urbanization in Asia. Okay, so a lot of people are moving to urbanized areas where job opportunities and education might be a little more available, whereas in rural communities, it's still a very low class or almost a peasant-like class. These large-scale producers, they're bringing in different improvements such as precision agriculture, like you mentioned, increase or more advanced irrigation systems, which also involves risk mitigation when it comes to agriculture in the face of changing environmental times, increased infrastructure to increase the accessibility and availability of food products, and crop diversification, which if you compare that to a modern American system, we see a lot of monoculture, but I believe that opportunity is there for crop diversification with larger scale. They do also have the capital needed to invest in this new technology. Small scale, they're limited on the capital they need, and in order to increase production, you've got to increase your plowback. You've got to increase the investment back into your operation, right? Large scale has that opportunity, where small scale, they're going to be limited on that, so they're probably going to remain in that antiquated state using ancient farming techniques, which are not near as efficient. Large-scale producers also have the option to make longer-term investments, such as orchard crops, whereas small-scale farmer, they may not be able to hedge enough risk in different crops in order to develop like an orchard-type crop production system on their own. And they're also, like they mentioned earlier, rooted heavily in tradition, which is fine, and that's important to maintain and think about, but they're also more reluctant to change, so reluctance to adopt this technology. They continue to rely heavily on human and animal labor, which is, as we know, is highly inefficient. They are constantly losing that population, so there goes your human labor, there goes that resource. So how is Farmer Joe lost both of his kids to urbanization? They're in town, they're learning, they're going for higher education instead of staying on the farm. Well, land abandonment increases, and then we see a decrease in production levels. Whereas if you took like the Claas Paddy Panther, which is a rice transplanting machine, which can replace up to 20 laborers for hand planting rice. So there you go, seeing the mitigation of that loss of labor, whereas one farmer become more efficient in his production levels. And ag tech can alleviate that loss of human labor. When we're talking about that urbanization, one of the rates we're looking at, it's in Asia, the population in urban areas in the year 2000 was 1.53 billion people, roughly. It's projected that at current rates, by the year 2030, it'll be 2.6 billion people in urbanized areas. So that's still a figure y'all need to look at and think about. So when we talk about displacement of farmer, how many of those farmers are actually already leaving regardless of big ag? So I think there's a lot of arable land there available that just goes unused. So that's where big ag can come into play. Maybe we're not just displacing them, maybe we're using a resource that's otherwise going unused.
So very, very excellent points. I was just wondering, so what is the problem in Asia? Is it an inadequate food supply? Asia is not producing enough food to feed its people. Is that the crux of the problem?
I think that one of the biggest drivers of any decision really is monetary incentives, right? Why do these people continue to produce rice? Rice grows well there. They make money off of rice. That capital goes back into buying that food that they need. Well, if they're all producing one crop or producing what they've been told their entire lives is what makes them money so they can go buy that food or reduce that food scarcity, they're going to continue to do that. So I think that maybe if Big Ag takes over that, and I don't mean to get away from the question, but maybe if Big Ag...
I'd like you to answer the question.
Right. Maybe if Big Ag takes over those cropping systems, maybe smallholder farmers are able to better produce those crops. Maybe they have the opportunity then to produce specialized crops for themselves.
Well, I didn't understand your answer.
I know.
I would like to know, is the primary problem in Asia due to an insufficient food supply?
I can't say guaranteed answer for that, but when I was
So we
doing-
don't have an answer to that question.
In India, they actually have about 40% food waste from just being bruised, damaged, and just rotting. So I mean, there is a lot of food waste. If we can fix that, a lot of the food security problems could also be answered that way, but it won't be entirely since it's only 40% India. But that was just when I ran across that while I was doing my research. If that answers somewhat.
I don't want to appear overtly aggressive, but let me ask you, is that the problem in Asia, inadequate food production?
So Caitlin Murphy, I would say that I would definitely say that there is inadequate food production, especially considering that the USDA, we do send over a lot of imports to the Asian area. Indonesia in particular is actually the 4th largest market for U.S. consumption of soybeans, but we also send over things like wheat and cotton. So there's definitely a demand for more diversified bulk food products aside from just rice that they can produce themselves.
Okay, and so this idea that 80% of the agriculture is conducted by small producers apparently is not working.
Right.
And so that's then also lends credence to this team's idea. We need to improve productivity. We'll do that with large-scale production.
In theory.
What does that mean? I feel like I'm in a political debate here. Just be straightforward.
Well, I mean, if we go on here, I'm Red Orr, by the way, we can talk about the goals that we have with the smallholder farms and how they're targeting that to fix
Go
these
for
issues.
it. And that was the question that I asked them from the large scale.
So-
Thank you for putting me back on track.
So the smallholder farms have 3 main goals, which they're trying to increase the productivity, profitability, and environmental sustainability in their region. They're working, they've got multiple approaches to reaching these goals, and so I'm going to go into that now. But due to the lower quantities of land, these smallholder farms are able to spend greater amounts of time working with their crops through pest management, upkeep, etc., which gives them a greater outcome from each plant at the harvest. These farms also tend to have better soil conditions than the larger farms do, considering the small amount of land that they have and the amount of time that gives them to take care of their land, which they're also using that time to repair their soil and put back so they can get more out of the crop. So with getting more out of the crop, putting more into their soil management, pest management, they're getting higher nutrient content in their crops, which is helping to solve the growing malnutrition issue that they have over there, which is very important. So with the better soil and pest management practices, these smallholder farms have increased their average plant yield by 79% according to the FAO, which in return is helping to assess the growing food security issue in the region of that we're trying to take care of. And like Bennett said, with 80% of all the food consumed in Asia coming from the smallholder farmers, that's very important. These smallholder farms are also working to increase profitability in very simple ways. they tend to hire folks with lower levels of education that they can pay at lower wages. And with these lower labor costs, these farms can increase the profitability of their farm. Although they're increasing the profitability of their farm, these farms are also helping to solve the poverty issues in the region by employing more people than the largeholder farms do due to their technology and mechanization. While the smallholder farms are employing higher quantities of people, they're also teaching these employees about agriculture issues in their region through the labor that they're performing. While they're lowering the region's unemployment rate, they're also increasing the region's education on the food security issues, which is a profit in itself. And due to the increase in mechanization and technology that the largeholder farms have been implementing and are doing in an increasing rate, that's only a negative effect on the employment and poverty rate in the region, which has been an issue. But now these smallholder farms aren't only solving food security issues, they're working to increase their environmental sustainability. So while there's, like I said before, while there's larger quantities of land to take care of and these smallholder farms have more time to take care of it, they're able to decrease, chemical approaches at pest management and things like that, and they can do more mechanical and physical approaches, which is beneficial to the environment because they're lowering what they're putting into our environment, which is making everybody healthier and safe in return, which at the rate that the largeholder farms are going out with their technology and mechanization, they're not doing so good on the environmental side because they tend to put more in with chemicals and things like that.
And do you have any data to support the negative environmental impacts?
Well, I mean, it just goes on the research that's been found, through the outcomes of different chemicals and whether, people are looking for more organic type farming or, less chemicals and what's better for the body, just things like that.
Well, you finished?
I'm done, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you about the pest management strategies. What do small-scale farmers typically do?
Well, they're doing more, hands-on. They're getting out there, it's a lot more getting down on your hands and knees, pulling weeds, doing this and that, and actually spending time in the crops rather than a quick pass over, spraying and things like that. And they get in there and they spend more time in these crops. They're checking it all the time to see, if we've got different weeds or things growing in that are negatively affecting the crop, and that's taken away from it. And they have more time that they can spend there, whereas, with large scale, you're going to have your spray in time, things like that, and you just go through there. You're not really continuously checking to see if you can go in between those spray times and fix take care of the pest problem.
So how do you address Mark's comment where we look at, was it India, 40% losses? Adam. I always call you Mark. Adam. Yes. 40% loss.
Of food waste. Yes.
Of food waste. And so how do you address that issue where I'm thinking that when you take this that's not good. When you take this approach where you have this intimate connection with your plants, there's a possibility that you've got fungi, organisms on this produce, and you may have pests as well. You can't catch every one of them. Right. And so that post-harvest is a serious problem worldwide. And part of that could be the result of the fact that we don't take any of these measures to prevent these organisms from, they're harbored by these fruits and vegetables, and when you store them for a short period of time, you have tremendous losses. So it's difficult for me to wrap my mind around that, where, yeah, it is great, you have a small plot of property, you have this intensive approach, but it's really sad to think that all of your hard work could disappear in a matter of days or weeks due to these post-harvest issues.
Correct.
So is that of concern to you? The fact too that you have all of these individuals working on this small plot trying to manage. Right. And if you could imagine what life is like when it's high humidity, high temperatures, pulling weeds or pulling off pests off of plants, it's really tough, difficult work.
Right, correct. No, I agree. But, we're going to get into this in a minute, but there's ways we've thought about an approach, to solve the waste issues like you were talking about, putting more local markets in between these smallholder farms that they have so many of there, which, decreases the time from when they're harvesting. They can take it straight there to the market in these small towns. The people can get it there. Whereas with the largeholder farms, they're more sending it someplace. It's got a time period between harvest and transportation and getting it there, of where you're seeing this waste come from and the time that these pests can get on the harvested crop. Whereas, so if we have these local markets, the smaller, in between the smallholder farms, we can get that crop there, get it sold where it's consumed, and we don't have the period where we're gaining the problem causing the waste.
Okay. Well, I just need to go back to this team. Okay, please, your comment.
I've got to touch on that hand labor thing. In India, 50% of all the work-related recordable injuries are related to agriculture. 50% of all injuries in agriculture in India are related to hand tool use. Of that, 23% are related to sickles, which is a very sharp blade used for harvesting crops. So when you increase the human interaction with plants, especially when it comes to harvest, which is typically one of the most dangerous times using hand tools, you increase the chance for physical injuries to occur. So you're actually exposing your human resource to more injury-related work task, which I feel like you're undervaluing that human resource somewhat, because it seems like, well, they're just an object rather than an actual part of the system.
And I understand what you're saying, but I mean, that being said, there's still injuries and issues that come up with the technology, large equipment and things that can happen, with servicing the equipment when you're outside of actually performing the harvest or planting the crop, things like that. And then that all goes back, we're talking about safety here, and there's the chance of whether your employee will get hurt or they won't get hurt. There's always a chance, regardless whether it's large holder or small holder. But that kind of goes off topic, where we're trying to solve, getting more production for the amount of land we have to solve the food issue, rather than while we're producing and making money with our farm, we're just keeping our people safe. We're trying to target feeding the people, that don't have the food right now, and taking care of that issue.
Correct. But if your people are becoming hurt and unable to work, then you're increasing the unemployment rate just because of the antiquated cultivation methods you're using.
Right, but that, like I said, that goes back to you. You still have the injury rates with your farm. So if you have lower amounts of employees, unlike smallholder farms, you have the chance somebody gets hurt on some large equipment, and that person can't run that. What do you do then?
Time out. Okay, points well taken. I did want to make a comment, and because I'm a moderator, I could do this. You had mentioned about this movement of people from the farm to the cities. And we will have the farms now producing food for all of these people in these urban environments. Just one thing I really feel we need to be mindful of in the US, that we have these food deserts, that there are communities, and despite this huge urban population, we talk about our low unemployment rates, there are people that have really poor nutrition in these environments. And one approach that California is looking at is actually developing small community garden plots, but also individual plots for people to grow right outside their door. This is extremely small scale farming, but just one. This is actually a sidebar to our discussion here. Now, Chris, I forget, I'm so confused. Now, who goes next?
Just ask the next question.
How about you? Okay, so what I'd like to ask you with this one with regard to, I guess, are you ready for accessibility? Yes. Wonderful. So with regard to accessibility, in fact, you had mentioned bringing the crops from the farm to the market. And so that's a really important issue to discuss. You have a crop, small scale, how does it get to the marketplace?
Okay, so Caitlin Murphy again. So in terms of smallholder farmers being able to get their crop to market, in short, they're getting their crops to market with much difficulty, speaking both in terms of local and export markets. Overall, there's very limited production assets and food sufficiency capabilities within regions like China, India, Japan, South Korea, especially considering the lack of rural infrastructure, unstable roads, impedes transportation, like very much so. And even in terms of if they were to be exported, shipping ports are not very reliable. All these factors make transport of inputs and goods very difficult and expensive. There's still very poor marketing systems. Farmers are very vulnerable to price volatility and manipulation within the markets. There's lack of rural credit, so farmers have to scrimp on inputs, resulting in lower yields to take to market. Let's see here. And so, yeah, in 2002, according to a book called The Global Farms Race, the region of Southeast Asia was estimated to have produced 150 million tons of paddy unhusked rice, which consists of about 1/4 of the world's total output over an area equivalent to 45% of the region's cropped hectareage. But in the end, the region itself consumed 95% of this production. So it stays very local. It does not go very far. And even in Vietnam is actually one of the biggest rice producers of the Southeast Asian region. But the Philippines is also a major traditional rice importer, and in some extents Indonesia as well. So at the end of the day, governments in Asia still wield very heavy influence over the rice sectors, controlling price and inventory control. So without further supports, they're not going to make it much farther than local areas.
Okay, so I'm wondering, in essence, are you saying that big agriculture will not devote their products to the local population? They'll end up exporting most of it?
I think the biggest driver is global consumer interests, and I think the next interest after that is food security. But in the end, I do think it's economically driven.
And that the big agriculture will favor the international market.
At the end of the day, yes.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good. And how about you folks with regard to large-scale production?
Me, Adam. Before I get on to what large scale is, to answer what she was talking about staying locally.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay within India. A USDA study had found that they actually send 79% of their agriculture crops around that area, Vietnam, Iran, some other countries in that area. And India's also the second largest exporter of agricultural crops behind China. So India does keep it around that area more so than probably some, but it does stay somewhat local considering Asia. Now, to go to my topic of transportation for large scale, in India, they pretty much use just whatever's available. Pretty much if they have a small amount, they'll get like a trailer and hook it up to their bicycle and get it there. If it's a larger amount, they'll use tractors, they'll use trucks, or what they call lorries, to get it there. And they also, the way they do it is they stack it within so high that it also, on these bumpy roads where she was talking about the infrastructure, it's lacking. Mm-hmm. These roads are not very well paved, or they're not paved at all, so there's a lot of bumps like South Carolina roads here. But this also leads to a lot of food waste. So if we can answer the infrastructure, that would reduce food waste and be able to have more to sell. I actually want to give you a real-life example of how building off technology is going to help large scale, while also answering Chris's concern about if we switch to more technology, it's going to get rid of employees, the employment rate. Well, at the same time, infrastructure is also going to decrease that as well in certain places. Cardamom growers in Bhutan, they actually used to have to walk 10 hours carrying 40 kilograms of it to get it to the nearest Indian market to sell. When they actually had to walk, the cardamom was actually sold for $7.40 per kilogram. Well, since 2003, the rural government of Bhutan has actually put in over 1,500 kilometers of roadways and power tiller pathways, which now has actually led to a significant decrease in the cost per kilogram of cardamom, which is now 3 cents. Now, technology is also going to be able to, for a large scale, is going to be able to supplement the loss of employees, because small scale farms are not going to be able to employ employees with only making 3 cents a kilogram. Implement technology, it makes up for it, and they can afford it now. It's cheaper. So,
Any rebuttal from the small scale people?
I would actually like to kind of go ahead and talk about what you just brought up with the food deserts in the urban areas and how this kind of relates to this topic. Basically, the reason in Asia you're not seeing and even in South Carolina, for example, the reason you're not seeing the food desert in some of these more rural areas, like I know we see one, downtown Greenville, Easley, that area. There's that, and it's because the access that these urban people have is only, it's limited to outside production because there's no producers in the urban area. So you have these large corporations bringing the food in, and all of a sudden, along with that, these people are at the control of the large producers, and a large producer is going to produce what brings the most money, not necessarily what's the most nutritious. And I think that's, I think that does tie in a lot with the accessibility part. Mm-hmm. People in these urban environments don't have accessibility to the nutrients per se, due to being supplied by the large-scale farmers.
Very good. I know I'm looking at my watch here, and also knowing that Dr. Kresovich has to speak. Also, we need your closing remarks before Dr. Kresovich comes up here. The last question deals with this whole accessibility issue, making food that's grown locally available to the local citizenry. What kind of policies do you think need to be implemented in order to ensure accessibility to residents of the local produce that is produced in their region?
Well,
Caitlin again.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, Caitlin again. Governments definitely need to step in and get involved with this, because, at the end of the day, like, what really prevents these things from happening is money, is spending ability. So I believe that could be relieved with subsidy programs, maybe like some price stability, and if it doesn't come from government, maybe even foreign investors. But of course, that would also come with the imminent threat of whether or not these smallholder farmers would face fair compensation, if that were to be the case.
Caitlin, I'm sorry, I just can't follow you there. So what are you recommending? How do we improve accessibility? In simple terms.
In simple terms, I think there just needs to be more partnerships, whether it comes from
Partnerships, I need more information.
like partnerships from like what's that?
NGOs, like World Food Program.
Oh right, yeah, from like World Food Programs.
Farm aid?
Farm Ed, yeah.
Yeah.
Or is it Farm aid or AID?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I just didn't prepare like specific resources
You're fine.
for this.
Come on, we're among friends here.
Yeah.
But these are really difficult issues, and that's
Yeah.
why we talked about this in the 80s, and we're still talking about this stuff.
I know.
But I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that's really also part of the problem as well, is getting the food to these people.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys now.
yes, it's me again. There is infrastructure problems. Currently, India, there is not a complete connection of rural areas to each other and to urban areas, so they can't get access to all the markets. This will actually be answered. This problem will actually be answered through the Prime Minister's National Rural Roads Program. There's also still a problem getting to mountainous areas. They still have to walk down and back up with food and stuff. There's also the remote areas of countries that are not connected to roads, so they can't really get access to markets and to other nutritious foods that they are lacking nutrients from. There's also extension service. A real life example was the government of India started a Kiwi program in Arunachal Pradesh. they actually no longer wanted to import kiwis from New Zealand to Delhi, so they decided to start the program. Well, it became successful. It started producing yields of 4,000 tons of kiwis a year. The problem is that they only stopped at giving these farmers the kiwis and growing them. That's where they stopped. They didn't teach them how to meet international shipping standards so that they could also be exported. They didn't teach them how to market it to the locals and to the markets themselves. So they had no way of getting it to the market and selling, so a lot of it went to waste. So now Crop Connect Enterprises also stepped in at this point and actually fixed this problem. And now that they are exporting it and selling it locally, but essentially there is a need for better extension services in these countries as well, so that the farmers know what's nutritious, they know how to market it, how to meet exporting standards so that they can sell it internationally as well to bring money to them more than what they could get probably locally. So.
Great. So I'm thinking you're looking more at the small scale farmer, of getting them involved and educating them about growing the crop, marketing it, selling it, or because you guys are taking it from the large scale approach. How do you fit in?
Well, essentially, I gave this real world example of producing 4,000 tons of kiwis, but they don't have any way to sell it or to.
Oh, so who's doing that? A large agribusiness entity?
No, it's a large scale. It's like the people of that area are a large scale farming of it.
Oh, okay. I guess.
So I mean, they pretty much were given the trees, plant it. They knew they wanted to grow it and sell it, but had no way of didn't know how to meet the international shipping standards, so they couldn't export it. They didn't know how to market it, so they couldn't sell it outside of that area.
I see. So, government programs, perhaps,
pretty much there was a lack of not just knowledge, but fully thinking out the process of introducing it to the area and then going to selling it to the people. Okay. It was pretty much just introduced and then stopped right there.
Very good. Okay. So this concludes the questions that I have for you, but I would love to have your closing remarks. And since we began with large scale, let's end, or at least begin on this side, with small scale. Closing remarks.
All right. I had just a couple of, almost proposed solutions that we could talk about in regards to small scale farming in Asia. And I think, in my team's research, what we really came across was this idea of, starting co-ops among communities in regards to solutions for small agriculture, because all of a sudden it creates the opportunity for these small scale farmers to be competitive not only locally, but with a combined surplus, they can compete on a global economy as well. Because all of a sudden they could combine their outputs, their yields, and it would allow these international policies such as minimum support prices or procurement prices to automatically affect them to where they are getting this guaranteed price for their crops, because all of a sudden they would combine powers amongst a community to have a marketable surplus of crops, even though they're all smallholder farms. And I think going along with this idea of co-ops maybe would be, working with getting these smallholder farms working in concert with largeholder farms, because I know where I come from, I've seen where a large farmer is the head of a soil co-op or a county soil board, and he's able to kind of pool his resources along with the resources of the smaller farms to ensure a maximum production potential as well as conservation potential among the entirety of the co-op. And I think that's something that we could do with minimal outside input outside of the education aspect, as well as minimal governmental input. You wouldn't have to change a whole lot of current regulations in order to have this. And so going forward, I kind of thought, that would be a potential solution as far as smallholder farms go in the region. And Bennett's going to add something.
And also going off what Chris said with the co-ops, there's also when you start pulling resources between these smallholder communities, there's more opportunities for increased infrastructure for post-harvest stuff, for refrigeration, storage, stuff like that to limit what Adam said earlier. There's 40% losses in yield post-harvest in India. But if you start pulling these smallholder farmers together where their capital is a little bit more similar to not technically a large-scale farm, they still have their small entities, but they can pull together to make a community refrigeration, storage, and stuff like that. That could also solve some of these waste issues.
And just going off of that, I mean, you see co-ops in the U.S. do that now, where a county co-op will have a seeder or a drill available to their constituents, and at the same time, there's a co-op-owned storage location here in the U.S. where all of a sudden, if the prices are low, the farmer can store their crop there, and it's something that these farmers wouldn't have access to normally. So it's an all-encompassing kind of planting to harvest, post-harvest even, idea of innovation for the smallholders.
Excellent points. And how about the large-scale group, your closing remarks?
Okay, so I think Adam touched on this a little bit earlier, and then Bennett just mentioned it, but the major loss in crops for developing countries like Asia comes during transportation and storage because they don't have the infrastructure and technology to keep the produce fresh. So according to FAO.org, in the article Global Food Losses and Food Waste, Extent, Causes, and Prevention, in developing nations such as Asia, food waste occurs mostly in the early and middle stages of production due to the poor infrastructure. So if we could fix this problem, and even here at Clemson, we could work with World Food Programs, we could cut back on the total world food waste by about 1/4. And we could do this by helping developing seeds that slow down the process of spoilage and making certain crops resistant to spoilage bacteria or fungi. And this could be beneficial towards food insecurity and the world food hunger because we're cutting down on world food waste by about 1/4. And we see that this is a big problem in these developing countries in Asia. So food insecurity and the world food problem is a serious problem that has really no black or white solution to it, but small-scale farmers and large-scale farmers are going to need to work together in order to solve the problem.
That was beautiful. We're not done yet. I'm looking at the time here, Dr. Krisovich. I know you're on shortly, but I was just wondering, I'm a simple guy. I just wanted to just break it down as simply as I can. Is it wrong to say we need to prioritize? Our people come first. We feed them first, and then any surplus we sell to the international market. But that's too simple, isn't it? Because we're not doing that in some of these regions. But what were your thoughts about that? And then we're going to have to close.
Just going off your point, I think the easiest way to solve this problem is to simplify it. I think you need to remember that the people come first, and especially in some of these other regions, especially Asia and broken down into these little countries that make up Asia, they're more worried about their economic gain as to exporting these products instead of worried about their people that are also hardworking into producing this product. So I think it kind of just needs to be simplified down to where the government needs to be like, okay, we have a problem here. We need to feed our people first and then worry about exports and economics of our country second. And I think, I'm not a politician by any stretch of the imagination, but it's going to come from the government realizing they have a problem. We've got to take care of our people first before you start seeing some real solutions to the problems.
Bennett. Any thoughts there on your side? Yes, sir. I haven't heard from you all morning, and you are.
I'm Tristan.
Tristan.
Yes, sir. Can we get the mic over here? All right. So, kind of to answer your question on what is the right route. I mean, clearly, smallholder farmers is kind of already the predominant farms of Asia, and it's really not getting it done, in terms of providing food security for the area. So, I just think it would be easier to teach and apply all the new and advanced knowledge that we would come of large-scale farms. It'd be easier to teach fewer people and apply that to feed and grow food than it would be to teach a bunch of people and apply a bunch of different information and technology to a vast region. It's just, if you do that, it's just, accessibility and getting all that out there is just going to make it more difficult. and it's not really feasible. So if you could, count it down to, a few large, producers of food that can produce it in a way that is, more sustainable and provide food security, I think it'd be better off than, the small-scale farms that are just it's going to be hard and more difficult to reach them.
Thank you, Tristan. We need to close this end of the program, but I would like to say I am so honored to be in your presence. All of these experts, and I've learned so much. And if any of you run for office, you've got my vote. You too, Bennett.
Thank you, Bob.
So I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Kresovich so he could close out the program with his discussion.
So excellent job in moderation, a challenging topic, and really thoughtful comments coming out from both groups. One of the things that came out at the end of the discussion from both groups was, when I first saw the advertisement, the thing that bothered me the most is versus. I don't like versus. I don't want to be on a team. I think the integration of the concepts here from both perspectives are really important. And you all highlighted that at the end. I think that's critically important. Second of all, why is global food security still an issue? We're old codgers and it's been a problem forever. Yeah. Finite land, finite water, and 9 billion people by 2050. Increasing populations, so we have to find solutions. But they're complex, like you all have highlighted. So there's social issues, political issues. Think about the implications of the U.S. Farm Bill and farm subsidies on what's grown globally. Another issue is you're all young and energetic, and this is a really important topic. How many of you have been to Mexico, Bolivia, India, Mali? How many find opportunities to get out, because it's really important. Robert highlighted this, and you all highlighted this. When I travel internationally, I'm really interested in listening to the stakeholders. What do the stakeholders want? The other thing that I think is important is not to generalize. What goes on in a certain state in India could be wildly different than what goes on in Bangladesh. So optimizing for particular environments, particular cultures, particular systems is really, really important. But I think the brain power's here, the energy's here, the attitude is here, and I challenge you all to step it up and go from here and move on to make those opportunities real and challenge yourself to go out there and tackle this problem, because it isn't going to go away for a while.